Hi, this is Stuart Weems and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. My goal is to give you simple, easy to understand strategies, insights and tips to help you master the game of building wealth. And in this episode, I'd like to talk about why it's important that your spouse or partner, whatever you'd like to refer them to, has an understanding of your family's financial position and is engaged in that decision making. So typically, it's really common for one spouse to have a greater interest in finances and managing the family's finances. Typically that most interested spouse takes responsibility for making the financial decisions. Sometimes that will be in connection or concert with through a discussion with the other spouse, or sometimes a spouse will unilaterally make those decisions. Now, it feels like a good division of labor, particularly if a particular spouse or one spouse has a genuine interest in the subject matter, and particularly if the other spouse has a genuine disinterest in the subject matter. But it's not a good thing, and I want to explore that a little bit through this podcast and give you some suggestions about what you could think about doing. So one of the problems is that if the decision, let's call them the decision-making spouse, if they pass away, and particularly if they pass away unexpectedly, it will cause a lot of stress and worry for the remaining spouse. Because not only do they have a little knowledge, they don't have a thorough knowledge of your financial affairs, but they also typically have a low level of confidence and a low level of experience and understanding in order to make financial decisions. And this all compounds and causes a lot of stress and worry at probably the worst possible time. That is, they're having to deal with your passing, assuming the person that's listening to this podcast is the decision maker, which is probably more likely. It causes a lot of problems. And I've seen it in my practice. What I try and do as often as possible is make sure that I'm talking to both spouses at least every so often, and make sure that I know that even if one spouse is just completely disinterested in money, that they still have an understanding and a high-level understanding. And that really certainly helps avoid causing undue stress and worry in a time where it's avoidable, and it's probably the worst time to have that sort of stress. The interesting thing also is that there's been some horrible situations of spouses finding out about how dire their family's financial situation is when the relationship breaks down. So that is that husband and wife or a de facto couple decide to separate, and it's only then that one party learns about the massive tax debts, the liabilities, the fundamentally unsound investments that the other partner has made. And then they're going to have to live with those decisions through the transition of unwinding those assets. Obviously a strong relationship has a foundation of mutual trust and respect, and that would include typically discussing and disclosing all material financial decisions with your spouse or de facto partner before any transactions are made. That what I think would be a normal expectation. Unfortunately, it doesn't always occur. Now, quite often one spouse, in particular I find men, often have a strong sense of responsibility to provide, in inverted commas or quotations, for their family. And sometimes that responsibility can drive them to take risks and make ultimately silly decisions. And this can be compounded by the fact that they might feel like that they shouldn't burden their partner with those decisions by discussing it with them, so they kind of protect their partner. This all can result in tears, typically in the long run, and it's not something that's ever going to really yield positive outcomes. So it is the responsibility, I think, of all of us as individuals to ask questions and seek to understand. We can't turn the blind eye. We can't say, "Oh, look, you deal with it. I'm just completely disinterested," because at the end of the day, it might end up falling back in our lap, and we had a wish we would took a stronger level of responsibility for making those decisions. And really, that's not to say that you can't trust anyone or that you can't delegate. But the thing you can't delegate is your obligation to take responsibility for your own money. So, certainly find a good quality financial advisor, let your partner make decisions and educate you and trust that they're going to look after your best interests, all those sorts of things, but make sure that you ask questions, because at the end of the day, it's your money, and at the end of the day, you're going to have to live with the consequences of making those decisions. Now, I'm not suggesting a partner needs to have a really detailed, nitty-gritty understanding of every situation, nor am I saying that we should enter into those conversations with a predetermined level of distrust, but just to understand at a high level, what does this do? What's the liability? What can go wrong? These are all good questions to answer. The other The other benefit of both partners being on the same page is that you're more than likely to stick to the strategy. So, for example, if your strategy requires you to contribute a certain amount of money into a share portfolio every year, and you both understand why that's important, why it's important to consistently do that, why it's important to make sacrifices in some years to year in order to do that, to stick to the plan, then it's more likely you're going to hold each other accountable for doing that, and you're more likely to be successful. Whereas if it's just a strategy that someone's developed by themselves for their own family, you might find it difficult to pull the other partner's expenditure into line in order to meet those goals every year. So being on one page and having each partner buy in to the strategy is really important. So what do you do if your partner isn't interested? You've got a disinterested party. Well, first thing, let them listen to this podcast, because there's obviously some fundamentally sound reasons why they should take some level of interest. But here's a few other tips. You can certainly ask them to join you at your next meeting with your financial advisor or accountant or whoever is advising you in respect to these matters. You can let them know that what sort of steps that they need to take should you pass away unexpectedly. So who they need to talk to, how your assets are set up, where to access bank accounts, those sorts of things. You can ask them for help. You can say you don't really want to wear the burden of making all the financials, the family's financial decisions, and that that task is best shared amongst both of you. Or if you're still having trouble, maybe engage the assistance of a third party, such as a counsellor. They'll typically have tools and strategies to help you address that, whether you do that together or whether you do that by yourself to sort of get that counselling. It's up to you. But certainly you need to try and engage, or both partners need to try and engage with each other to make sure that they're fully aware of what they're doing with their money, your individual money. The Australian Banking Association has a code of conduct which all banks must comply with, and they made some changes as a result of the Royal Commission and all the reports and insight that occurred over that period of time. They made some changes that code of banking conduct that came into effect on 1 July this year. And it required, I quote, to take extra care of customers that may be more vulnerable. And that includes things like a term that's now used called financial abuse or domestic violence. And this is situations where people don't have access to bank accounts that are in their name, or knowledge of assets are in their name. They're asked to sign forms they don't understand, or really anything that you're uncomfortable with. So I've included links in the show notes. There's lots of advice on the government's, on ASIC's Smart Money website, that if you're being treated in this way, that there's ways to sort of get help. The other benefit of making sure that everyone's on the same page is it can help your executors significantly. So, executors occupy a very important role. Their job is to really carry out your wishes as set out in your will, but it also can be a very time-consuming and onerous job, and anyone that's acted as an executor will certainly confirm that. And also sometimes executors don't have the experience, understanding, or time to really execute their duties in an accurate and timely fashion. So one solution to this is instruct them to engage your trusted advisors. That could be your financial planner or accountant, And you can do that in your will. You can do that obviously verbally through discussions with them, or through drafting what's called a letter of wishes, which is really an addendum to your will that can be updated at any time. And that's really a letter from you to them on setting out a little bit more detail how you would like them to execute their duties. And so to be able to do this, what you need to do is first talk to your advisor, accountant or financial advisor, and make sure they're willing to take on that work. And then ensure that you have that conversation with your executor. And your executor could naturally be your spouse, brother, sister, friend, whoever it might be. Have the conversation with them and say, okay, it's really simple. Here's my will. Here's what I'd like to have. Go and seek X, Stuart's advice. He'll look after you and, just oversee that process. And that releases the burden from a time perspective and, from an emotional perspective in order for them to execute their responsibilities. So it's okay for one spouse to take the responsibility for organising your family's finances. That's fine. It's okay for one person to run with it. However, the responsibility to make decisions, understand your income, assets, liabilities and cash flow is something that must be shared equally amongst spouses. And if anyone that's listening to this that's a spouse that's relatively disinterested in their financial situation, that might come back to bite you one day in terms of extra stress or problems or issues. And so I would strongly counsel you to take some basic level of interest in your financial situation. And this is ultimately likely to empower you in the future and make you feel more confident no matter what life brings you. So there you go, just a short one this week in terms of making sure that we're all on the same page if we have a spouse or de facto partner. Okay guys, until next week, bye for now.